The first thing you hear is the sound that becomes your entire world, the steady rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. It's a metronome counting down the seconds of a life suspended in limbo. For Eleanor Vance, lying paralyzed in an ICU bed, it was the only proof she still existed. But then two other sounds pierced the sterile fog voices. One was her husband, Richard, a voice that once promised forever. The other belonged to a younger woman. They weren't whispering words of comfort. They were laughing at her expense over her comatose body, planning a future built upon her grave. They thought she was a ghost already. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The world for Eleanor Vance had shrunk to the space between beeps. Beep. An inhale she couldn't control. Beep. An exhale she couldn't feel. Beep. The pulse in her own ears a faint drum against the symphony of machines that were living for her. She was floating in a thick grey abyss, a prisoner in the derelict vessel of her own body. A car accident, they'd told her, during a fleeting moment of lucidity. A truck had run a red light. That's all she remembered before the darkness swallowed her whole. Now the darkness had company. Look at her. Richie. A lilting saccharine voice whispered a sound as cloying as cheap perfume in the sterile antiseptic air of the ICU. She just lies there. It's creepy. That was Chloe Decker. Richard's protégé at Sterling Properties, a girl barely 25 with ambition that burned brighter than her bleached blonde hair. Eleanor had seen the way Chloe looked at her husband, a predatory gleam disguised as admiration. She had seen the way Richard's hand lingered on Chloe's back for a moment too long during company galas. She had known in the way a woman always knows, but had chosen the quiet dignity of denial. Richard's voice, a low baritone that once soothed her to sleep, was now laced with an impatient, cruel amusement. The doctors say it's a miracle she's alive at all. Significant brain trauma. They don't know if she'll ever wake up. Even if she does, she'll probably be a vegetable. More work for me. He sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by a tragedy he was secretly celebrating. A wave of impotent rage, cold and sharp, washed over Eleanor. Vegetable, I can hear you, you bastard. I can hear every treacherous word. But her lips wouldn't move. Her eyelids were leaden shutters. She was buried alive. Chloe made a soft, cooing sound. Oh, you poor thing, having to deal with all this. And right before the Kensington Tower deal is about to close. There was a rustle of fabric, the squeak of a leather chair. He was sitting down. Chloe, she imagined, was perched on the arm of his chair, or maybe even his lap. The thought was a physical blow. Is everything, going to be okay with the financing? With her being like this? Don't you worry your pretty little head about that. Richard chuckled. His voice was closer now, right beside her ear. She could smell his cologne, the expensive sandalwood scent she'd bought him for their anniversary. It smelled like betrayal. Everything is in my name. Well, our names jointly. But as her husband with her incapacitated, I have full control. Power of attorney. It's one of the perks of marriage, I suppose. I sign the money moves. The Kensington deal will make us legends, Chloe. And once she's gone, it will all be ours. Ours. The word was a dagger twisting in a wound she couldn't show. Her entire life with Richard flashed through her mind. She had been a brilliant corporate lawyer at Pierce & Lyle in Chicago, on the fast track to a senior partnership. Then she met Richard Sterling, a charming, ambitious real estate developer with dreams that stretched as high as the skyscrapers he wanted to build. He'd courted her with a relentless passion, convincing her that his dreams were their dreams. He'd told her he needed her mind, her legal acumen, not in an office tower downtown, but by his side, helping him build his empire. So she'd quit. She'd traded her corner office for a role as his unpaid advisor, his strategist, his wife. She had structured his deals, vetted his contracts, and built the legal framework for Sterling Properties, making it an impenetrable fortress. And she had done it all for love. For him. What if she doesn't die? Chloe's voice was a nervous whisper. What if she just stays like this forever, hooked up to these horrible machines? There was a pause. The beeping of the monitor seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. Eleanor felt a cold dread snake its way through her paralysis. "Then we'll have to make a decision," Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that was more terrifying than any shout. "Dr. Peterson says it will eventually come down to quality of life. As her loving husband, I'll have to make the hard choice. To let her go peacefully. It's what she would have wanted." He stroked her hair. The touch was grotesque, a spider crawling on her skin. She wanted to scream, to recoil, to claw his hypocritical hands away from her. "You won't get the chance," a voice screamed inside her head. A part of her she thought had long been dormant. The sharp, analytical mind of Eleanor Vance, Esquire, began to stir. Chloe giggled a horrid, tinny sound. "You think of everything, Richie. You're so smart." She lowered her voice, thinking she was being discreet. "Is the nurse gone?" "I've missed you." The sound of a kiss, wet and obscene, echoed in the silent room. It was followed by Richard's smug murmur. "Patience, kitten. A few more days. We have to keep up appearances. The grieving husband. Once the deal is closed and the doctors give me the final nod, our new life begins. We'll buy that penthouse overlooking the park. We'll take the yacht to Monaco. Everything she has, everything we built, will be the foundation of our happiness." They continued to talk, their voices a venomous drone, outlining the future they were planning to build on her ashes. They mocked her taste in art, the charities she supported, even the way she organized the kitchen. Each word was a fresh insult, a new layer of humiliation. Eleanor absorbed it all. She let their cruelty soak into her, not as a poison, but as fuel. The grey fog in her mind began to recede, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. Richard thought he had full control. He thought her name on the accounts was a mere formality. He had always dismissed her legal structuring as Ellie's little hobby too complex for his big-picture mind. He had signed every document she put in front of him for 15 years, without reading a single clause, trusting her to protect his interests. He had never once considered that she was protecting her own. As they finally rose to leave, Richard leaned over her one last time. "Sleep well, darling," he whispered, his breath hot on her cheek. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything." He and Chloe walked out, their laughter echoing faintly down the hallway. The door clicked shut, leaving Eleanor alone again, with the steady, rhythmic beep. But now the sound was different. It was no longer a countdown to her end. It was the ticking of a clock. And Richard's time was running out. She just needed to wake up. 15 years earlier, the world was a canvas of boundless opportunity for Eleanor Vance and Richard Sterling. Their Chicago apartment, though. Modest, buzzed with an electric energy filled with architectural blueprints spread across the dining table and legal pads covered in Eleanor's precise, elegant script. He was the dreamer. She was the architect, not of buildings, but of the very foundation they stood upon. Eleanor had just made junior partner at Pierce & Lyle. She was known for her unyielding diligence and an almost psychic ability to find loopholes and craft ironclad contracts. She loved the intellectual combat of corporate law, the thrill of outmaneuvering an opponent on the pages of a complex merger agreement. Then came Richard, a force of nature with a dazzling smile and a vision for reshaping the Chicago skyline. He saw in her not just a beautiful woman, but a strategic weapon. "Ellie, you're wasted there," he'd told her one night, gesturing passionately towards the city lights from their balcony. "You're making old men richer. With me, with us, we can build something that lasts, something with our name on it. I have the vision, you have the brains to make it bulletproof. We're a perfect team." His ambition was a drug, and she became willingly addicted. The decision to leave her firm was agonizing, a severing of an identity she had meticulously built. But looking at Richard, she saw a shared future so bright it blinded her to the sacrifices she was making. So she took the leap. Her first task was to structure their assets. Richard had a small inheritance and a great deal of debt. He was a brilliant salesman, but a reckless financial planner. He saw money as a tool for the present, not an asset to be protected for the future. Eleanor saw things differently. She saw risk everywhere. Market downturns, predatory partners' lawsuits, and the unpredictable frailties of human relationships. "We need to set up a holding company." "Richard," she explained one evening, sliding a diagram across the table. "A master trust. We'll call it E&R Sterling Holdings. Terms and all assets, all properties. Every share of stock will be owned by the trust, not by us as individuals. It's a shield. It protects our personal assets from any business liabilities." Richard had waved a dismissive hand, more interested in a new design for a cantilevered balcony. "Sounds complicated. Just do whatever you think is best legal, Eagle. That's why I have you." He'd winked, patted her on the head, as if she were a clever pet, and went back to his drawings. That condescension, though playful at the time, planted a tiny, cold seed of doubt in Eleanor's mind. It was the first inkling that he saw her contribution not as a partnership, but as a service. Still, she pushed the feeling aside and got to work. She created the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust with a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses that would make a tax attorney weep with admiration. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering. She was the settler, and they were co-trustees. As long as they were together and functioning, they had equal control. But Eleanor, ever the strategist, planned for every contingency. She embedded a series of triggers within the trust's charter tripwires that would shift the balance of power under specific extreme circumstances. She remembered the day she drafted the most critical one. It had been raining a gloomy Tuesday. Richard had just come home buzzing about a potential investor, but he'd also been careless with his words, making a joke about a friend who'd been taken to the cleaners in a divorce. "You'd never do that to me, though, would you, Ellie?" He'd laughed. Of course not. She'd smiled back, her heart a little colder than it was a moment before. That night she drafted Clause 11, Section B. She called it the Incapacitation and Fiduciary Duty Clause. It was her secret fail-safe. The clause stipulated that in the event one trustee became medically incapacitated, as certified by 2 attending physicians, the other trustee would assume sole unilateral control of all assets within the holding. This was standard. But Eleanor added a unique, vicious little twist. Her addendum subsection 2 stated that this transfer of power would be irrevocable if, during the period of incapacitation, the acting trustee was found to be engaging in actions that constituted a breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty. What defined such a breach? The clause was deliberately brilliantly vague, referencing actions demonstrating gross negligence, infidelity, or intent to cause financial or personal harm to the incapacitated party. Crucially, the activation of this subsection didn't require a court of law. It required only a formal attestation submitted by a legal representative of the incapacitated trustee, along with what the document termed credible supporting evidence. The evidence could be a recording, a sworn affidavit from a witness, or financial records. Upon submission to the trust's designated financial institutions, all control, all accounts, all properties, and all voting rights would be immediately and permanently transferred to a new secondary trust. This secondary trust was her true masterstroke. It was named the Vance Legacy Trust. She was the sole beneficiary and trustee. It was a ghost entity existing only on Napa, in a file in her personal safe, its charter lodged with the bank's most senior trust officer, a man who owed his career to a tip Eleanor had once given him. When she'd finished drafting it, her hands were trembling. It felt like a betrayal of the love she felt for Richard. It was a preemptive strike against a war she hoped would never come. "What's all this?" Richard had asked, picking up the thick document a week later, ready for his signature. "It's the final charter for the holding company," she'd said, her voice calm and even. "It's just standard boilerplate. Protects us from everything. I've put signatory flags on all the pages you need to sign." He'd hefted its weight. "God, you lawyers love your paperwork." He hadn't read a single word. He'd simply flipped through the pages, scrawling his bold, arrogant signature, Richard Sterling, wherever a yellow flag pointed. He was signing his own death warrant and applauding her for her thoroughness. Over the years, the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust grew into a behemoth. It held their penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, the vacation home in Aspen, a portfolio of stocks worth tens of millions, and most importantly, the controlling interest in Sterling Properties, the engine of their wealth. Richard, the face of the company, grew more arrogant with each new building that clawed its way into the sky. He forgot that the real power wasn't in the steel and glass he erected, but in the paper and ink she had so carefully arranged. He saw the fortress and thought it was his. He never realized he was just a guest, and she was the one who held every key to every door. Lying in her ICU bed, the memory of that rainy Tuesday returned to her with perfect clarity. The condescending pat on the head, his careless signature on the page, his laughter. He had called her his legal eagle. He was about to find out just how sharp her talons were. Days bled into one another in a monotonous cycle of beeps, hushed medical jargon, and the sponge bath at dawn. For Eleanor, it was a period of intense, silent focus. While her body lay inert, her mind was a whirlwind of activity, rereading every line of the trust charter, planning her moves like a grand master, envisioning a chess game 20 steps ahead. The first and most critical step was communication. She had to reach him. She had to reach Benjamin Carter. Benjamin was more than her former law partner. He was the closest thing she had to a brother. They had started as ambitious associates at Pierce and Lyle together, spending late nights fueled by coffee and a shared passion for the elegant intricacies of the law. He was the only one who had truly understood what she was giving up to join Richard. "Just make sure you're fireproof, Elle," he had warned her, his expression serious. Men like Sterling, They build empires, but they burn a lot of bridges. Don't let yourself be one of them. He was the only other person on Earth who knew about the Vance Legacy Trust. He had been its legal witness. His signature was there right next to hers. Her daily visitor was a nurse named Maria. She was in her late 50s with kind eyes and hands that were gentle, yet efficient. Unlike the other staff who treated Eleanor like a piece of medical equipment, Maria spoke to her. She would recount stories about her grandchildren, comment on the weather, or read passages from a novel she was enjoying. She did it without any expectation of a response, a simple act of human connection. It was during one of Maria's visits that Eleanor felt it a twitch, a tiny infinitesimal flicker of a nerve in her right index finger. It was a spark in the void, a signal from a distant shore. She focused all her will, all her mental energy on that one finger. The effort was Herculean, like trying to lift a mountain. The muscles atrophied from disuse resisted. But her mind, honed by years of legal battles, was relentless. Move. Nothing. Move. A tremor. Maria was adjusting her IV drip, her back to Eleanor. "The doctor says your vitals are getting stronger, dear," she said cheerfully. "That's a good sign. We're all rooting for you." Eleanor ignored the words, focusing only on the signal from her brain to her hand. She pictured the nerve endings firing the electrical impulse traveling down her arm. The image of Richard and Chloe kissing in this very room flashed in her mind, and a surge of adrenaline, pure and potent, flooded her system. The finger twitched again, more noticeably this time. She waited until Maria turned back towards her. The nurse was checking the readout on the heart monitor. Now was the time. Eleanor poured every ounce of her being into the effort. Her finger curled just slightly, then straightened. It was a clumsy, spastic movement, but it was real. Maria's eyes widened. She slowly looked from the monitor to Eleanor's hand. She froze. Did you just do that?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Eleanor did it again. A curl, a twitch. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She rushed out of the room, her voice echoing down the hall. "Dr. Rossi. Get in here. Now." Dr. Isabella Rossi was a sharp, no-nonsense neurologist who had been overseeing Eleanor's case. She came in followed by Maria, her expression skeptical but hopeful. "What is it, Maria?" Her hand. She moved her finger. "I saw it," Maria insisted. Dr. Rossi came to the bedside and took Eleanor's hand. "Mrs. Sterling." "Eleanor. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand." Eleanor focused. The doctor's hand felt warm, a tangible link to the world she was fighting to rejoin. She pictured Richard's smug face, heard his condescending whisper, "I'll take care of everything." The rage gave her strength. She squeezed. It was faint, a mere flutter of pressure, but it was undeniable. Dr. Rossi's professional demeanor melted away for a second, replaced by a genuine, brilliant smile. "Well, I'll be. Welcome back, Mrs. Sterling." Over the next 2 days, progress was slow but steady. Eleanor could now squeeze on command, and she had regained a small amount of movement in her eyelids. She could flutter them, not yet open them, but it was a start. It was communication. 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. They established a system. Richard's visits continued a grotesque pantomime of grief. He would hold her unresponsive hand, the same hand that was now plotting his ruin, and speak to her in sorrowful tones for the benefit of the nursing staff. "I'm right here, darling. Fighting for you," he'd say. before immediately turning his attention to his phone, barking orders about the Kensington deal. He had no idea the vegetable in the bed was watching his every move through barely parted eyelids. The moment she had been waiting for came on a Thursday afternoon. Richard was out meeting with investors. Dr. Rossi was making her rounds. Maria was by her side. "You're showing remarkable progress, Eleanor, Doctor," Rossi said, making notes on a chart. "We're seeing more activity in the frontal lobe. Your cognitive functions seem to be intact. It's just a matter of the brain re-establishing connections with the body." This was her chance. Using their established code, she began to flutter her eyelids insistently. Maria noticed first. "Doctor, she wants something." Dr. Rossi leaned in. "Eleanor, what is it?" 1 squeeze for yes. 2 for no. Are you in pain? 2 squeezes. Faint but firm. Do you need something? Water. 2 squeezes. They went through a list of possibilities. After several frustrating minutes, Maria had an idea. Is it about a person? Do you want to see someone? 1 powerful squeeze. The effort sent a jolt through her arm. Your husband, Dr. Rossi asked. A violent, unmistakable series of 2 squeezes. No, no, no. Dr. Rossi and Maria exchanged a look. Someone else, then, Maria said gently. Can you spell the name? She began to go through the alphabet, a slow, painstaking process. A B. When she got to B, Eleanor gave a strong squeeze. Then for E. Then N. It took nearly 20 agonizing minutes, but finally the name was spelled out. B-E-N. Ben. Dr. Rossi looked puzzled. Is Ben a family member? 2 squeezes, a friend. 1 squeeze. Eleanor then fluttered her eyelids again, a signal she had devised for urgent. She had to convey more. She needed a pen. She needed a word. Maria, seeming to understand the desperation, had a flash of inspiration. Doctor, maybe. Maybe we could try facilitated communication. I could hold her hand with a pen. It was an unconventional idea, but Dr. Rossi, intrigued by Eleanor's fierce determination, agreed. Maria gently placed a pen in Eleanor's limp hand, wrapping her own around it to support the weight. She held a notepad beneath it. Okay, Eleanor, Maria said softly. Guide my hand. Just tell me where to go. The pen felt alien, a clumsy extension of a will that was still disconnected from the body. But Eleanor focused, channeling the image of the word into her mind. It was the key, the trigger, the one word only Ben would understand. She guided Maria's hand in a series of shaky, almost illegible scrawls. The letters were misshapen, the lines wobbly, but after a few minutes, a word was there on the page. Fireproof. Dr. Rossi looked at the paper, then at Eleanor. Fireproof. Eleanor gave one final exhausted squeeze. Yes. And you want us to call Ben? Dr. Rossi confirmed. Yes. We'll need a full name and number. That was the next hurdle. But Maria, ever resourceful, remembered seeing a list of emergency contacts in Eleanor's admission file. She retrieved it. There are a few Bens here. Benjamin Scott, Benjamin Riley. Ah, here. Benjamin Carter. Is that him? The squeeze she gave in response was the strongest one yet. It was a declaration. The game had begun, Doctor. Rossi made the call. Her voice professionally neutral as she explained that her patient, Mrs. Sterling, was showing signs of consciousness and was asking for him. Eleanor let her head fall back against the pillow, the exhaustion absolute. She had fired the first shot. The architect had sent the signal. Now it was up to her ally to bring the walls of the fortress crashing down on its arrogant king. Benjamin Carter was in the middle of a deposition when his personal cell phone rang. He normally ignored it during proceedings, but the caller ID was Chicago General Hospital. His heart clenched. He excused himself immediately, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He'd been calling the hospital twice a day for updates on Eleanor getting the same vague, grim report. He feared the worst. "This is Benjamin Carter." "Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Isabella Rossi from Chicago General. I'm calling about Eleanor Vance Sterling." "Is she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "She's awake, Mr. Carter." "Well, partially. Her cognitive function appears to be returning, but she has very limited motor control. She asked for you." Relief washed over him, so intensely his knees felt weak. "She asked for me." "How?" "It's a long story, but she was very insistent. She also communicated a word. She wanted me to tell it to you. The word is fireproof." Benjamin froze. The air in the hallway outside the conference room suddenly felt thin. Fireproof. It was their code, a private joke from 2 decades ago that had morphed into a solemn promise. It was the word they'd used when he witnessed the Vance Legacy Trust documents. "This is my fireproof vest, Ben," she had told him, "just in case I ever get caught in the blaze." Her telling him that word now could only mean one thing: the fire was here. And Richard had started it. "I understand," Benjamin said, his voice now cold and clipped, the friendly lawyer replaced by a predator. "Thank you, Doctor. I'll be there this evening. Please do not mention my impending visit to her husband, Mr. Sterling. Is that understood?" "Perfectly." "Mr. Carter," Dr. Rossi replied, a hint of complicity in her tone. Benjamin hung up and walked back into the conference room. "My apologies, gentlemen," he announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "A critical emergency has arisen. We'll have to reschedule." He was out the door before anyone could object. He didn't go to the hospital first. He went to his office. He unlocked the top drawer of his private filing cabinet, a place no one else had a key to, and retrieved a thick navy blue binder. The cover simply read, "Vance Legacy. Contingency." He then made a call to a private investigator he kept on retainer, a former police detective named Frank Miller. "Frank, it's Ben Carter. I have a job for you. Priority Alpha. I need discreet 24/7 surveillance on 2 individuals, Richard Sterling and a woman named Chloe Decker, an employee at his company. I want everything: who they meet, where they go, and especially their interactions at Chicago General Hospital. I have a strong suspicion of a breach of fiduciary duty. Get me something credible, Frank, and get it yesterday." His next call was to David Chen, the Senior Vice President of Trusts and Estates at Northern Merchants Bank, the institution that held the vast Sterling fortune. He and Chen had a long-standing professional relationship. "David Benjamin Carter, I'm invoking a contingency clause on the ENR Sterling Holdings Trust account number, ending in 771. I will be in your office at 9:00 a.m. sharp tomorrow with the necessary documentation. I need you and your legal team present. No advance notice is to be given to either of the current trustees." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end. "Ben, that's one of our biggest accounts. Invoking a clause like that without notifying the trustees, it's highly irregular. The circumstances are highly irregular, David. Benjamin said, his tone steely. The Charter allows for it. Read Clause 11 Section B, subsection 2. You'll find I'm well within my rights as the designated legal representative. 9:00 a.m. He hung up. That evening he visited the hospital. He found Eleanor just as the doctor had described. Her eyes were open, and they tracked him as he entered the room. The fierce intelligence in them was unmistakable. He sat by her bed and took her hand. "I got your message, Elle," he whispered. "Fireproof. The plan is in motion. I just need one thing from you. The evidence." Using the laborious yes or no squeezing system, she told him everything. She described the conversation between Richard and Chloe, quoting their cruelest words verbatim. She told him about their plans for the money, for her life, for the future they were stealing. Benjamin listened, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. This wasn't just a marital dispute. It was a conspiracy born of breathtaking cruelty. "Is there a witness?" he asked. "A nurse? A doctor?" She squeezed twice. No. They were alone. "Damn it," he muttered. It was her word against his, and she was in no position to testify. But then he remembered Frank. His phone buzzed an hour later. It was Frank. "You're not going to believe this, Ben. Your boy Sterling and the blonde Decker. They're not exactly subtle. I followed them from the hospital to a restaurant downtown, sat 2 tables away, put my phone on the table recording audio. It's not great quality, but it's damning. He's toasting to the imminent closing of the Kensington deal and their new beginning. He talks about his wife's tragic decline and how he'll soon be unburdened. It's all here." Benjamin felt a grim satisfaction. It was enough. It was the credible supporting evidence the clause required. He asked Frank to have the time-stamped audio file emailed to him immediately, along with a sworn affidavit of how and when it was obtained. The next morning at precisely 8:55 a.m., Benjamin Carter, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, walked into the hushed, marble-floored offices of Northern Merchants Bank. He was calm, his movements precise. He was a lion entering an arena ready for the kill. He was escorted to a large boardroom where David Chen and 2 of the bank's top lawyers were waiting, their faces a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Stacks of documents related to the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust were piled on the polished mahogany table. "Good morning, gentlemen," Benjamin said, placing his leather briefcase on the table and clicking it open. He didn't sit. He preferred to stand to command the room. "Ben, this is highly unusual," the bank's lead counsel, a man named Harris, began. "Mr. Sterling is one of our most valued clients. Mr. Sterling's status is about to change," Benjamin replied coolly. He pulled out the navy blue binder. "This is the charter for a secondary dormant trust, the Vance Legacy Trust. As per the instructions filed with this bank 15 years ago, it is to be activated upon the triggering of Clause 11B2 of the primary trust." He then laid out his case with surgical precision. He presented Dr. Rossi's signed medical assessment of Eleanor's incapacitation, fulfilling the first condition of the clause. Then he presented Frank Miller's sworn affidavit. Finally, he took a small digital audio player from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "And this," he said, his voice dropping, "is Mr. Sterling, in his own words, from last night, discussing his plans to benefit financially from his wife's imminent death, a death he himself seems prepared to facilitate. This constitutes, I believe, a textbook breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty." He pressed play. Richard's smug, confident voice filled the silent boardroom. The lawyers listened, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock, and finally to grim understanding. The recording ended with the sound of Richard and Chloe clinking champagne glasses. Benjamin pressed stop. The silence in the room was absolute. "The charter is clear," Benjamin stated, his voice like ice. Upon presentation of this evidence, all assets liquid and fixed, all shares, all properties held by E&R Sterling Holdings are to be transferred immediately and irrevocably to the Vance Legacy Trust. Eleanor Vance is the sole trustee and beneficiary. Richard Sterling is to be removed from every account. His access is to be revoked. His name is to be struck. As of this moment, he has no legal claim to a single dollar held by this bank. David Chen looked at his lawyers. Harris, the lead counsel, read the clause in the trust document one more time, his finger tracing the words Eleanor had written so long ago. He looked up at Benjamin, then at his colleague, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. The language was ironclad. There were no loopholes. They were legally, unequivocally bound to act. Harris let out a long, slow breath. "Mr. Carter, you've made your case. We will execute the transfer. It will be completed within the hour." Benjamin nodded, a flicker of grim triumph in his eyes. He snapped his briefcase shut. "Thank you for your cooperation, gentlemen. I'll be waiting for confirmation." He walked out of the bank and into the bright morning sunlight. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. All that was left was for the wolf to walk into it. Richard Sterling woke up feeling like the master of the universe. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, glinting off the glass and steel of the city he felt he owned. Today was the day. The Kensington Tower deal. The largest of his career was closing. At 11 a.m., he was scheduled to wire a final 9-figure earnest money deposit to the sellers. By noon, the deal would be done, and his legacy would be cemented. He showered whistling a cheerful tune. He chose his most expensive suit, a custom-tailored Tom Ford, and a Swiss watch that cost more than most people's cars. He glanced at the framed photo of him and Eleanor on his bedside table, a relic from a happier time. A pang of something annoyance, not guilt, pricked at him. Her timing for this whole medical drama was incredibly inconvenient. Still, he mused it did simplify things. He sent a quick text to Chloe. "Today's the day, kitten. The future is ours. See you tonight to celebrate." He had a quick breakfast served by his housekeeper, and then sat down in his home office, a magnificent room with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. He logged into his Northern Merchants Bank business portal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He navigated to the wire transfer page, entered the staggering sum, the recipient's account details, and the authorization codes. He clicked Confirm. An error message appeared on the screen. Transaction declined, insufficient funds. Richard stared at it, baffled. Insufficient funds. That was impossible. The account held more than double the required amount. He tried again, thinking he'd made a typo. The same message appeared. Annoyance began to bubble in his chest. A technical glitch, no doubt. The bank's website was probably down for maintenance. He hated dealing with these little technological hiccups. It was beneath him. He picked up his phone and dialed his private banker, a man named Henderson he'd had on speed dial for years. "Richard, good morning, calling about the big day." Henderson's voice was obsequiously cheerful. "Henderson, your system is on the fritz," Richard snapped, his patience already wearing thin. "I'm trying to wire the Kensington deposit, and it's kicking it back. Says insufficient funds. Fix it. Now." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. The silence stretched on for an uncomfortably long time. Richard? Henderson's voice had lost its confident edge. It was now hesitant, nervous. I'm seeing something very unusual on my end. Your access to the E&R Holdings accounts appears to be restricted. Restricted? Richard barked out a laugh. What are you talking about? I am E&R Holdings. It's my company, my money, unrestricted. I can't, sir. Henderson stammered. The directive came from the top. From our Legal and Trust Division. As of 9:01 this morning, your signatory authority was revoked. The assets have been consolidated into a new trust. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Richard felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a young man on the verge of his first bankruptcy. That's absurd. It's a mistake. Put me through to your legal department. Put me through to David Chen. Mr. Chen is in a meeting, sir. He left explicit instructions not to be disturbed. Sir, according to this, the new controlling entity is something called the Vance Legacy Trust. The sole trustee is Eleanor Vance Sterling. The name hit him like a physical blow. Eleanor. It was impossible. She was a vegetable, a shell. She couldn't sign her own name, let alone execute a complex financial coup. This had to be some colossal, insane misunderstanding. Listen to me very carefully, Henderson. Richard said, his voice a low, menacing growl. My wife is in a coma. She is medically incapacitated. I have power of attorney. Whatever paperwork you think you have is fraudulent. You are going to reverse this right now, or the first call I make will be to my lawyer to sue you, this bank, and every person involved into oblivion. Are we clear? Mr. Sterling, the documentation we received was accompanied by a medical directive certifying Mrs. Sterling's condition, but it also invoked Clause 11B of your trust's charter. It was presented by her legal counsel, Benjamin Carter. It's all in order, sir. My hands are tied. I'm sorry. Benjamin Carter. The name ignited a firestorm of fury in Richard's mind. Eleanor's sanctimonious lawyer friend. This was his doing. He must have somehow forged her signature, cooked up this scheme to steal his money. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. The Kensington deal. The deposit was due in less than 2 hours. If he missed that wire, he would be in breach of contract. He'd lose the deal, forfeit the millions he'd already put down, and his reputation would be in tatters. His lenders, his partners, they would descend on him like sharks. He hung up on Henderson and immediately tried to use his corporate credit card to book a helicopter to fly him downtown. Declined. He tried another card. Declined. He pulled up his personal checking account, his walking around money. The balance was 0. She'd taken everything. Not just the business assets. Everything. The penthouse, the cars, the personal accounts. It had all been funneled through the master trust. He was locked out of his own life. He stormed through the penthouse, a gilded cage that was no longer his. He saw the art on the walls. Eleanor had chosen the furniture she had picked out. It all seemed to be mocking him. He was a king who had woken up to find his castle was made of cardboard and his crown was made of tin. He grabbed his car keys and sprinted to the garage, his mind racing. He had to get to the bank. He had to get to the hospital. He had to confront Carter and that bitch Eleanor. He would scream. He would threaten. He would force them to undo this. He jumped into his Bentley, a car he now realized he probably didn't even own anymore, and tore out of the garage, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He ran a red light, earning a blast from a taxi's horn. He didn't care. The carefully constructed facade of Richard Sterling, titan of industry, was crumbling around him, and all he could feel was a desperate, primal rage. He had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated his wife. He had seen a quiet, supportive partner and had been blind to the brilliant, ruthless lawyer who had always been lurking just beneath the surface. He had thought he was the predator. He was just now realizing he had been the prey all along. When Richard burst into the ICU, he was a storm of fury and entitlement. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was flushed, and his eyes were wild. He bypassed the nurses' station, ignoring their calls for him to stop, and slammed open the door to Eleanor's room. "What the hell have you done?" he roared, the sound utterly out of place in the hushed, sterile environment. But the scene that met him was not what he expected. The room was no longer just a sterile medical space. It was a command center. Benjamin Carter, looking impossibly calm, in a crisp suit, stood by the window. Dr. Rossi was present, holding a clipboard and looking on with a stern, protective expression. And in the bed, propped up by a wedge of pillows, was Eleanor. She was not the comatose victim he had last seen. Her eyes were open, clear and sharp as chips of ice. An IV was still taped to her arm, and her movements were slight, but the force of her presence filled the room. The fragile, broken woman was gone. In her place sat a queen on her chessboard, looking at a cornered king. "Richard," she said. Her voice was weak, raspy, from disuse, but it cut through his rage like a scalpel. "You're making a scene. You should lower your voice." He stared at her, momentarily stunned into silence by her lucidity. He turned his fury on Benjamin. This is your doing, Carter. You cooked up this scheme, you forged her name." "There were no forgeries." "Richard," Benjamin said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Everything was executed according to the letter of the law. A law that you incidentally signed off on. You should really read your contracts more carefully." Richard turned back to Eleanor, his face contorting with disbelief and rage. You can't do this. That money is mine. I built that company." "Did you?" Eleanor asked, her voice gaining a little more strength. "I seem to recall structuring the loans. I recall negotiating with the zoning boards. I recall writing the contracts that made your vision a reality. You were the face, Richard. I was the foundation. And you were careless enough to build your entire house on a foundation you didn't understand." She took a slow, deliberate sip of water from a cup a nurse held for her. "I heard you, you know. I heard everything. You and Chloe." Richard's face went pale. "I heard you calling me a vegetable." She continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "I heard you discussing my quality of life and how you'd have to make the hard choice to let me go. I heard you kissing her right there in that chair you're about to lean on. I heard you planning your trip to Monaco with my money. Each word was a perfectly aimed shot." Richard staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. He looked around the room at the doctor, at the nurse, at Benjamin. He saw no sympathy, only cold, hard judgment. He was exposed, his vile hypocrisy laid bare. You were awake," he stammered. "My mind was, and it was working perfectly. It was remembering a rainy Tuesday, 15 years ago, and a very specific clause I wrote to protect myself from a man I hoped you would never become. A clause for a breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty. It's a beautifully vague phrase, don't you think? It gives a lot of latitude. Your little bedside chat with Chloe more than met the criteria. Just then the door opened again. A pale, trembling Chloe Decker stood there, trailed by a grim-faced man in a suit whom Richard recognized as the head of his company's HR department. Richard Chloe's voice was a panicked squeak. My corporate cards were all declined. They told me my employment was terminated. The man here gave me this box. She was holding a small cardboard box with a few personal items from her desk. She looked from Richard's ashen face to the woman sitting up in the hospital bed. The power dynamic in the room was palpable and terrifying. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and it was dragging her down into the abyss with it. "Get out," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on Chloe. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of an executioner's sentence. Chloe flinched, turned, and practically fled from the room. Richard's rage finally gave way to a desperate, pathetic plea. "Eleanor, please," he begged, taking a step towards the bed. "The Kensington deal, my entire career is on the line, everything I've worked for. You can't just take it all away. We built it together. We built it," she acknowledged, a flicker of the old pain in her eyes. "And you tried to steal it. You stood over my comatose body and plotted my death so you could run away with your 20-something mistress. The together part of our story ended then, Richard. As for the Kensington deal, it's no longer your concern. The Vance Legacy Trust now holds the controlling interest in Sterling Properties. I've already been on the phone with the other partners." They were surprisingly understanding when Benjamin explained the situation. "The wire transfer for the deposit was made an hour ago, from my account. The finality of it crushed him. She hadn't just taken his money. She had taken his legacy. She had stepped seamlessly into his place, erasing him from his own life's work, with a few phone calls and the stroke of a pen. So what now?" he whispered, the fight draining out of him, leaving a hollow shell. "What happens to me?" Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time he saw not just anger, but a profound, weary pity. "I imagine your lenders will be calling soon. Your investors. You personally guaranteed many of those loans, didn't you?" "Always so confident. Without the assets of Sterling Properties to back you, you are insolvent. You have nothing. The penthouse is owned by the trust. The cars, the accounts, everything. You have the clothes on your back, and a watch that you should probably sell. I've instructed my lawyer to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, and let's get creative attempted conspiracy to misappropriate assets. You'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges." Benjamin Carter stepped forward, holding out a plain white envelope. "This is a restraining order, Richard. It forbids you from coming within 500 feet of Eleanor. You are to have no contact. If you violate it, you will be arrested. A security detail is waiting outside to escort you from the premises." Richard looked from the envelope to his wife's face one last time, searching for any sign of the woman he married. He found none. He had killed her, in a way, and in her place a stronger, more formidable woman had been born from his betrayal. Defeated, he turned and walked out of the room, a king dethroned. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving a profound silence in its wake, broken only by the steady, calm beep of the heart monitor. It was the sound of a life no longer in limbo, but firmly, resolutely in control. The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Eleanor's physical recovery was arduous, but steady, driven by the same iron will she'd used to reclaim her life. The day she walked out of the hospital, leaning only slightly on a cane, she felt the Chicago wind on her face and knew she was free. She immediately took the helm of what was once Sterling Properties, and her first act was to have the name taken down. In its place, a new sign was raised, Vance Enterprises. Richard Sterling's downfall was as swift as it was spectacular. Stripped of his financial empire, his creditors descended, forcing him into a humiliating bankruptcy. He became a cautionary tale, a ghost in the city he once sought to conquer. Chloe Decker, a pawn in a game between a king and a queen, vanished into obscurity. Her ambitions turned to ash. Eleanor, however, took no joy in their demise. Her focus was not on revenge, but on reconstruction. She wasn't interested in simply building more towers. Instead, she established the Vance Foundation, funded by her company's profits, with a clear mission to provide legal and financial support for women victimized by marital fraud and financial abuse. Her story, once a private horror, became a public inspiration. She had been buried by betrayal and had clawed her way out, not just to survive, but to build something better from the wreckage. About a year later, she stood on the observation deck of the Kensington Tower, the very project at the center of the turmoil. Benjamin Carter stood beside her, looking out at the sprawling city. "Quite a view," he said softly. Richard always wanted his name on the skyline, and in a way, it is. Eleanor replied, a peaceful smile touching her lips. "This building will stand for a century, funding a foundation that will help thousands. It's a sterling legacy, just not the one he envisioned." The beep of the heart monitor was a distant echo replaced by the steady rhythm of her own resilient heart. She had taken a name tarnished by greed and redefined it, making it sterling again, but this time entirely on her own terms. The story of Eleanor Vance is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. It's a testament to the fact that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. She turned her darkest moment into her defining one, using the very tools of her oppression to architect her liberation. Her foresight and intelligence were her armor and her sword. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation of her name, her power, and her future. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Stories like these are important, and sharing them helps us all. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. What part of Eleanor's story stood out to you the most? Let us know in the comments below.